everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the TDWI webinar series. My name is Philip Russom, and I'm the Research Director for Data Management at TDWI. Today, I will be moderating a panel of data warehouse experts as part of this webinar. And so this panel of experts will be discussing various issues, but really leading up to 8 different tips for modernizing a data warehouse. So please stay tuned. If you're in data warehousing, BI, analytics, data integration, some sort of data management, I think you're going to get some very stimulating ideas today, perhaps even some ideas about how to prioritize your next modernization projects specifically for your warehouse or similar platforms. Also, today, towards the end, we will reserve ample time for a question and answer period. If you look in the web application that you're using, you'll find a field that's labeled Ask a Question, and that's where you will enter questions that we will answer during the Q&A session at the ending. Now listen, we'll have a variety of people speaking because of the panel, so I would encourage you to address questions to specific panel members if you want, or you can just, address them generally, whatever's good for you. And here in a few minutes, I will introduce the panelists so you'll know who we'll be speaking about. But first, I would like to tell you that a lot of the material we'll discuss today will be drawn from a new publication by TDWI. We have a series of checklist reports. We produce 6 to 8 of these a year, sometimes more. And so we have a new one just published called 8 Tips for Modernizing a Data Warehouse. And I would encourage you to read this report, and you can download the report in a PDF file free of charge from TDWI's website. So if you look on your screen, you'll see bit.ly/8DWMods. And so if you just pick up a pencil and a piece of paper, jot that down, this would be a great follow-up reading after the webinar. The report discusses 8 common modernizations as well as some other things. And today, we'll sort of be rambling because, it's the nature of a panel. We'll let these experts sort of lead us in various directions depending on what they're seeing in the marketplace, what they're seeing among technical users, business users, and so forth. So don't go expecting us to cover the whole report today, so you definitely want to read that report later for a great deal more detail. And yet today's webinar will give you a very, very good introduction to data warehouse modernization and those 8 tips. So the way I'm going to run the panel today is to give them a series of questions. So actually on the panel we have experts in data warehousing and related fields from 4 leading software firms, and all these firms sponsored the TDWI checklist report that I introduced on the previous slide. So I will introduce the panel members, but for the sake of time, I'm just basically going to tell you their names, job titles, where they work. If those panelists want to add a few more comments about the nature of their work, if they feel that's appropriate, they can do that later. And then really the bulk of the webinar here is going to me asking 3 groups of questions, and we'll try to hear from each panelist for each of the groups. So the first group will just ask them for their definitions of data warehouse modernizations, and especially what do they think is driving modernizations? What is it that gets user organizations, both technical and business people, to prioritize modernizations? We'll also talk about best practices and common solutions that help users to actually execute the modernization. And then towards the end, we'll have questions that get us looking into our crystal balls. And so we'll be able to look at future trends and predict what's going to be happening with the modern data warehouse in upcoming years. And then finally, like I mentioned, we'll conclude with questions from the audience. So don't forget, as you're listening to the webinar, go ahead and enter your questions at any time in the Ask a Question field that I described earlier. All right, brief introductions of today's panelists. First of all, we have TJ Lair. He's a product marketing manager at Cloudera. We have Vineet Tyagi. He's Chief Technology Officer and Head of Innovation Labs at Impetus Technologies. Steve Woolidge is Vice President of Product Marketing at MapR Technologies. And Chad Melee is Vice President of Unified Data Architecture Marketing at Teradata Corporation. So again, if you want to ask questions, you can address questions to these specific people. I'll bring this slide back throughout the presentation so you can see their names once again. Or if you just want to use the name of the companies they work for to direct your question, that would be great as well. Well, what I'd like to do now is just kind of prime the pump. I think many of you listening today on the webinar are probably new to data warehouse modernization, and those of you who have actually done it, you know what it is, etc. You know, data warehouse modernization can take many forms, so I think it's appropriate right now to just sort of, you know, prime the pump by talking about what are some of the common forms, and then, of course, we'll let the panelists give us more details. So, you know, data warehouse modernization can be simply additions to existing data warehouse environments. For example, those of you in data warehousing, you tend to add new data subjects, new data sources. You're typically dealing with relational technologies where you're going to add new tables, but also you tend to add new data structures, so new data structures for dimensions, for time series, and so forth. So a lot of modernization does involve new stuff, and sometimes you're just adding more onto the older things, so it could be new in that sense. Later we'll talk about how new platforms are having a big role with modernization. And, you know, also I think many of you tend to modernize your data warehouses to include more server instances, whether those are hardware servers or software servers. Typically, at the heart of most data warehouses is some sort of database management system, although today we'll talk about Hadoop and other alternatives. And so I tend to add more of those. If you have a clustering architecture, you typically add more nodes. And then, of course, quite often we add more storage to a warehouse environment depending on how it's architected. So quite often these modernizations are additions. If we skip down to a lower part in the slide here, it says upgrades. You know, believe it or not, I think for many of you, data warehouse modernizations have often taken the shape of upgrades. Like I said, there's typically some sort of database management system in the core warehouse. I know many of you have a multi-platform environment, so you may have multiple warehouses or different platforms that have operational data stores, marts, analytic databases. We're seeing Hadoop mixed in there, et cetera. So, you know, all of those need upgrades occasionally because, you know, the software vendors are very good about improving their products. And so there's a new upgrade to consider on a somewhat regular basis. So that is actually a common data warehouse modernization, just trying to stay current with the most recent versions of software. But also, I know many of you have been upgrading hardware like crazy, and there are certain migrations that most of you have gone through that I consider to be modernizations en masse. The whole data warehouse community pretty well moved from 32-bit to 64-bit several years ago. That's a kind of modernization. Part of my job is to run surveys, so I know a lot of users have been moving from SMP or some multi-processing computing architectures to platforms that are based on massive parallel processing or MPP architecture. So for many of you, that's been a modernization you've done in recent years. And then also, I mean, just kind of the way a lot of you have organized your teams and also organized in terms of schedules and the calendar. I know from my surveys, many of you do a quarterly update of the data warehouse. So instead of just rolling things out willy-nilly, a lot of you are very organized. You tend to roll out your modernizations on a quarterly basis. That's when you introduce new data structures, new sources, new business entities and data about them, et cetera. And so if we go back up the slide here, back up to more standalone data platforms and tools, that's actually one of the things that stands out when I look at TDWI members and other user organizations that I talk to in my research. You know, the data warehouse environment has always been a multi-platform environment, especially if we go beyond the database to reporting tools, analytic tools, and then there's data integration tools, tools for data quality. In recent years, we see a lot of master data management tools, and so on and so forth. If we tally up all that stuff, it's actually quite a list of diverse platforms that can be integrated together in the warehouse environment and the extended technology stack that reaches up into BI and analytics. And so we just, you know, one of the trends I see is users like yourselves adding more and more platforms to an environment that already had a lot of them. So we've got sort of a mounting complexity there, but also, why would you want to do that? Well, I think the big benefit is that many of you are embracing new types of data, and the older data platforms don't necessarily help you with unstructured data, semi-structured data. A lot of you are trying to get closer to real-time operations in the business, so you need platforms that are built better for real-time data. And with a lot of the new big data coming in streams, a lot of you are trying to gather that and deal with that data close to real time to get the fullest business value from it. Also, many of you have a lot of human language text or so-called unstructured data. Maybe it comes from your help center. Maybe it comes from social media. Maybe you have a developer environment or something that generates a lot of text. So many of you are adding new platforms to deal with that kind of text, and also text mining and text analytics tools that help you get the value out of it. So you get the idea. There's a lot of different directions that data warehouse modernization can go, and we're going to hit a bunch of these today as we proceed. So I'd like to move right into the first group of questions, and these are seeking some definitions of data warehouse modernizations. And I'm going to go in alphabetical order, at least for this slide. I'll mix it up later. I'm going to go in alphabetical order by the name of the company. So TJ Layer, I'd like for you to step up and be our first batter. So TJ, feel free to tell folks a little bit about what you do at Cloudera, but most of your time should be spent on telling me what manifestations of data warehouse modernization did you see most commonly, and also, just as important, what do you think are driving users to do these modernizations? Go ahead, TJ.
Absolutely. Thank you, Philip, for the introduction. Like Philip mentioned, my name is TJ Layer. I work on the product marketing team at Cloudera, focused on helping organizations across multiple verticals adopt Hadoop, and specifically the Enterprise Data Hub, in order to optimize their existing architectures and create new and innovative use cases around big data. So specifically around optimizing data architectures, a lot of times Cloudera is brought in to modernize data warehouses. And when I say modernize data warehouses, what we mean is augment them. So when organizations are starting to look at leveraging big data, so take, for example, machine-generated log data, enterprise data warehouses struggle to kind of keep up with the volume of data that machines generate. So they look at alternative technologies like Hadoop or unstructured data such as text information, for example. But we're not trying to solve problems that don't exist within organizations. So a lot of times what triggers these data warehouse modernizations projects are three categories of challenges that the organization runs into. The first one is missed SLAs. So if you are running a report through your data warehouse and the volume of data that you need to process is too large to process it within that SLA window. So imagine you need to get a financial report over to the CFO within 8 hours every day. Once that information becomes too large, the processing capabilities of your data warehouse might run into some issues, and you might need to augment your traditional data warehouse to increase the processing efficiencies and meet that SLA. That's one example that is driving people to modernize their data warehouse. Another one is active archive. So there's a few different buckets that organizations fall into. One is they have a data warehouse environment and they offload information onto an archive system. Maybe it's a tape or SAN system that's offline, and it takes forever for you to get that information, if you can even access that information, if it's possible, right? So for compliance purposes, that information needs to remain online for sometimes 7 to 10 years. So being able to keep that information online so that your analysts can access that, and then your compliance officers can have visibility into that historic data, is another reason we see people optimizing or augmenting their data warehouse environment to stand up, a big data technology or a technology right alongside of it, for you to offload that information and keep it online for your compliance purposes and your analytic purposes. And then the final kind of driver that we see people modernizing their data warehouses, when they start looking into the future around the new and upcoming business use cases that are coming down the pike. So when they see these new and innovative use cases, a lot of times these use cases include unstructured or semi-structured information that is going to be needed for analytic purposes or building big and new big data applications on top of the data, right, for a competitive advantage. For instance, if I'm building a application for my customers and I want to include some sort of text analytics capability within that new application, it's something that my data warehouse might struggle with. They might turn to new technology in order to complement their data warehouse and prepare themselves for the next business use cases that their organization is going to be requiring. So those are kind of the three challenges: missed SLAs, active archive, and new innovative business use cases that require big data. Is the drivers behind people optimizing and augmenting their data warehouse with big data technologies such as Hadoop.
That's great. That's great. Thank you, TJ, for bringing up service level agreements and how modernizations help companies meet them. Also, you mentioned mostly online archiving, and also text analytics, how to gather the data for that and then execute it on new platforms. That's great. Vineet, Tyagi, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you're seeing out there and what do you think is driving users into it?
Right. Thank you, Philip, for the introduction. Folks, good morning, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Vineet Tyagi. I am the CTO, and I also lead the innovation labs at Impetus. In my role, I am driving the technology strategy for our customers, helping them, take a look at the emerging big data technologies and creating a strategy as to how they can leverage some of these innovations that are happening and convert them into business value. So we've been working with customers, even before the world kind of knew big data as it's known today. The whole full-blown tsunami hit us. So we have been working and we have been helping customers leverage some of these technologies. So what we are seeing is in terms of manifestations directly, 4 or 5 things that I can think of that are the top 5 list. One of the things TJ already spoke about is an active archive. Hadoop-based warehouses do have a very attractive lower cost proposition. So using them for as an active archive for all your empirical processing is one very important manifestation that we've seen. People are also looking, and some of our customers have looked at, from the modernization perspective, the whole perspective of looking at the ETL process that gets data into the warehouse, and that itself is a bottleneck. Before, when you get the information, when an enterprise acquires the information, till the time you actually end up taking decisions or having insights on that information, the whole ETL process can be a bottleneck. The latency could be anywhere between a few weeks to a month before you even get to see that information. So ETL offload, offloading and using the MPP, the parallel processing capabilities of the Hadoop system to fasten that process and reduce the latency is another big manifestation that we've seen. An important perspective from the cost to, managing the cost perspective, the SLAs and other things. So one of the modernization ability that, most of our customers are, working on is that they want an ability to decide how to run their workloads. So there are certain kind of workloads that they want to have very quick SLAs, very tight SLAs around those. That could be run on your existing data warehouses, specialized appliances, specialized software. But there are certain kind of colder workloads and workloads where, the latency might be not be an issue, but the cost to performance, you can play around with that. So that is something that, is a big manifestation, that having the ability to create an adjunct warehouse, have the, Hadoop as a augmented warehouse solution, gives the ability to decide where can you run which workload based on the SLAs that you have. And definitely Hadoop is bringing in the elasticity that helps respond to the growth in data. You can respond to that growth in hours and days instead of the weeks and months that it used to take earlier. So in a way, it's kind of democratizing the whole access. And the biggest reason why we see this happening and what's driving our customers, Fortune 1000 companies that, we work with, is the fact that, there is the amount of data which is exploding. and there is a huge push to lower the cost of, per terabyte cost of data that you store and analyze in your data warehouse. That is a big push that's coming from, IT, that's coming from, the Chief Technology Officer, and, that's creating this whole imperative that requires, modernization. The another big driver that we're seeing is that, the whole world is moving towards kind of an in-time analytics scenario, where if you can act on the information as it occurs, you will be creating a bigger business value. A good example is a retail customer that we work with, and when they're launching a new product, we've created a system for them that we could listen to the social media, created a social media listing solution for them that can give you the customer feedback as it happens. So you don't have to wait. They didn't have to wait for all the data to be collected and moved in through a big ETL process before they can know how the product is doing. So that's in-time analytical need is driving a lot of businesses to have these sophisticated use cases that require your data warehouse to be modernized.
Vineet, thank you very much. Those are good examples, many of them involving Hadoop. So imagine Hadoop to enable a active archive, ETL offload, elasticity for data volume growth, and also kind of a rethinking of cost issues per workload and performance. Thank you, Vineet. Let's move on to Steve Woolidge. He's with MapR. Steve, what are you seeing out there, and what do you think some of the drivers are?
Yeah, I think the previous speakers covered a lot of them. I think workload optimization is certainly one. So at MapR, I run product marketing, and we're a Hadoop distribution company. So we see a lot of the similar things that TJ from Cloudera mentioned. I'll give a couple of customer examples. I think the other thing we see a lot of is really addressing new types of data, not just the fact that relational data from a lot of systems is, needs to be structured in the data warehouse, but a lot of our customers view Hadoop as a platform of innovation for new types of data. So one example is a large telecommunications company who uses Teradata together with MapR, and they use Teradata primarily for a lot of the sales and operations reporting, the financial reporting, and this telecommunications company wanted to start collecting all the IP information about networks that they support as hosted service offerings back to enterprise clients so that they could identify hotspots in these different data centers that they have set up so that they could proactively alert somebody or increase bandwidth on a network if they're hitting some of those hotspots. So for that, they used Hadoop because they were able to ingest that data very, very quickly because it just loads directly into the file system. There's no structuring that needs to happen. And they can get faster insights to that. And then those insights they find can be pushed into the data warehouse where it's joined with other customer information. So it's really a 1 + 1 = 3 type of thing where it's augmenting, but it's providing new types of analytics or new data, sort of like a data refinery that then gets fed into the data warehouse for mission-critical reporting within the enterprise. So that's one type of application I see, which is new types of data or new types of analytics. And then as Vineet mentioned, we also see a lot more drive towards real time. And I've been in this industry for 12, 15 years, and it's, people always talk about real time, but I think that there is a lot of innovation happening in the Hadoop ecosystem when you look at a lot of these streaming technologies like Storm and to some extent Spark Streaming. So we have a joint customer, again with Teradata, where they are in real time monitoring web traffic on their website. It's a financial services organization that has an online brokerage. So when you call into the call center, they're able to combine what pages you're currently looking at or have looked at in your past session together with information about your account and what types of equities you have. And in this case, they're using Storm to stream that information from the website on top of the MapR distribution. They aggregate it and they load it into some tables within the MapR database and combining that with lifetime value and other types of customer information from Teradata so that call center agent can in real time pull up the full information about that customer and better service them when that person calls in. So I think real time is another augmentation, and I know Chad will talk to this, but again, it's new types of data combined with the existing information they already have in the data warehouse. So it's, again, additive, not replacing in a lot of cases.
Well, Steve, those are great examples. You started by talking about workload optimization. Yeah, I think that's one of the reasons we're seeing many additional platform types brought into the warehouse environment. It's so that different workloads can find platforms that are a good home for the workload that can be fully optimized for performance, scale, et cetera. And yeah, you were so right about real time. Among TDWI members, there's a lot of talk about new data, and there is definitely investment in that area, but we see a lot of the actual modernization projects going for more real-time functionality. That seems to be a real driver for a lot of organizations. Hey, Chad, it's your turn. Can you sort of briefly finish us up here? What kind of modernizations are you seeing, and what's driving them?
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I'll start by echoing and validating that it's a theme amongst my colleagues here around ETL, and it really seems to be a very logical starting point for a lot of our clients to look at things like Hadoop to basically augment their ETL processes. Primarily, one, it just makes sense, some financial sense, but it's an easy project to justify because it's, cost takeout and reduction, and those projects tend to be a little bit lower risk and yield the necessary dividends. It's interesting. I've been in data warehousing now for over 20 years, and you kind of see things come full circle. When I started my career off at Dell in the mid-'90s, we were doing traditional ETL. Right? You have your ETL servers out there loaded up into a Teradata environment. And then what happened is just the power and the sophistication of the EDW improved to where that was just a significantly more powerful environment than any set of ETL servers with regular databases under them. So there was this big movement to do ELT. And, and a lot of times, too, it was cost takeout because you had these open windows at nights and weekends in which to leverage the power of that environment. But now that you've got, things like Hadoop that offer similar capabilities in terms of processing power and a certain degree of economics, we're seeing that come back, as TJ explained, to where that is now sort of makes a lot of sense, particularly for some of the newer data sources that are, very extreme in size, the sensor data, the weblog data, et cetera. And so that's definitely a trend that we're seeing. I will add that, I don't think any of our customers have, migrated all of their ETL off. What they're doing, the smart ones for sure, are taking a look at which ones make sense. But you're going to find many ETL jobs will actually, still perform better in an ELT model, right, if they're leveraging database functions, lookups, complex joins, reference data, and things like that. So I guess my key advice to this audience is absolutely, embark on an ETL optimization initiative using Hadoop. And but be smart about going through all your ETL routines and identifying the right candidates for one technology versus another. Certainly, again, it's a theme around new data types. We're seeing that as a big driver for modernizing the data warehouse. You look at some industries, I'll say automobile manufacturing is one where, cars nowadays are just rolling sensors, and that really just wasn't true a decade ago. And so this is net new data, still trying to get their arms around analyzing it and the value of it. It's very extreme in size, and the semi-structured nature of it makes it a great candidate. You look at telecom as well, where traditionally, they look at call detail records, but now wanting to even look at, how people are browsing on their phones and the weblog data. And again, very extreme if you're a Verizon or an AT&T. And so looking at how Hadoop can complement their Teradata environment in that regard. The one thing I'll add that hasn't been brought up yet, it's certainly in the paper, but I would certainly cite it as one of the big drivers that we're seeing with our clientele is this idea around embracing new forms of analytics, right? So if you've, been in the, relational world for a long time, obviously, you can do some very powerful analytics with MPP relational technology, predictive decision trees, all sorts of advanced analytics. But one of the things that relational has never really done well are more procedural type analytics like graph analysis, time series, Text analytics was already mentioned. And so the ability to do things like path to purchase, or really take what you're doing now with segmentation and augment it with these new forms of analytics. Or we're certainly seeing some of our clients, again, I'd cite in the communications industry, create better churn models by looking at graph analytics in conjunction with some of the analytic techniques that they've used in the past.
Well, Chad, these are great examples. Yeah, at TDWI, we see that ETL or ELT are great starting points for modernizing a warehouse, especially if you want to sort of offload and rethink where workloads are distributed in the data integration infrastructure in the data warehouse. I really like your last point there, Chad. You know, at TDWI, we see kind of the end goal being new forms of analytics like you were describing. And, you know, OLAP's not going away. It's still there. It's still very ensconced in the traditional relational data warehouse. But for a lot of companies, they want to get value out of new big data, and in a lot of cases, it's not so much about big data. It's about how do we use analytics to get more business insight, more information about customers, other entities. That seems to be kind of the end goal. So I think you're right. New analytics is the goal for a lot of companies. Hey, listen, panelists, as we move to the second groups of questions, I'm going to ask you to try to be much more succinct with your answers. And in this set, I'm going to start with Steve Woolidge. And Steve, can you maybe just give us, you know, just count a few things off on some fingers here about best practices? And folks, listen, best practices with modernization could be a lot of stuff. You know, a lot of times the modernization is something that's either new or distracting. And in my experience, when data warehouse teams, similar teams, when they do something new or distracting, they do quite often think about getting consultants or system integrators to come help them. Are you seeing that? Also, you know, with a lot of the new data and the new platforms that are coming in, there's kind of a skills gap right now. So what are you seeing for people to fill out the skills? So you can go that direction if you want, or other best practices. Steve, where would you like to touch in this broad area?
Yeah, one aspect I'll touch on is integrating new systems like Hadoop with your existing policies around things like data governance and security. So I think a lot of people look at these new technologies and they think, oh, I've got to kind of reinvent the wheel in terms of how I approach incorporating big data, and I've got to, you know, do security in a different way, in a different system. I think the more you can integrate with those existing best practices and technologies, the better. And, you know, in contrast to that, though, I think a lot of people also get stuck. They think everything has to be governed and locked down in a very secure way. And I think with Hadoop, you're going to be bringing in a lot of information that may not have personally identifiable information in it. You may not have it structured. You want to, again, have Hadoop as that platform of innovation, whereas Chad said you kind of do procedural analytics and different types of things that aren't as well suited for a relational model. So you may want less stringent governance and security policies on some of that data to allow people to do some more exploratory types of things. And then as you figure out the value and join it with customer information or other things that are PII, or personally identifiable information that needs to be more secure, then you kind of put it into that more governed process. So that's one thing that I've seen that people should focus on.
Yeah, I'm gonna interrupt at this point, Steve. So that's a great example. I'll ask the other panelists to be equally succinct. And yeah, you know, I do see a lot of new data as augmentation to older data. For example, a lot of people are building the complete view of the customer, and say your company deploys a new smartphone app. Well, that smartphone app helps the customer do self-service and other things, but also it's a channel, so you can see new behaviors because your customer will behave differently with a smartphone than they might when they're, you know, face-to-face in your store or office. So yeah, real good points there. And you also mentioned integrating Hadoop into the environment. That's a challenge for some people. That's great. Why don't we move on? Vineet, can I ask you to be really succinct? Can you just pick one spot and talk about where you're seeing some emerging best practice?
Absolutely, Philip. So, you know, one of the things that, you know, we've helped close to 25 big, large customers adopt Hadoop. And one thing we've realized is that, you know, when you're looking at, you know, large-scale modernization, you know, there's a lot of data warehouse environments and technologies that are in play. So I'll just say the top three are for us is use a staged approach. experiment with moving existing workloads slowly. We can begin with ELT, colder sets of data and other workloads which may be running and consuming or may not be best suited for the existing data warehouse environments. Try and stage them out as the first step to get some quick wins in, and then try to move on to start building and acquiring larger sets of data and building new use cases on this larger warehouse environment, if you will. The third thing that we see as a best practice is real-time should not be an option that you add later. It should be a foundational option, and the plumbing for that should be thought of, if not used from day one. At least we should be architecturally, from an infrastructure perspective, know that we will be using real-time streaming sources of data. How we will acquire them, what will it mean for our warehouse technologies, and what do we need to bring in, like Storm, Spark streaming, and other technologies. So the real benefit of a modern data warehouse will come when we really remove the latency between when the information becomes available and when we act on it. So that's the biggest benefit.
I'm going to interrupt at that point. Those are excellent points. I like the one you started with, talking about workload restaging. Most people's data warehouse environments, especially as they add newer platforms into the mix, you do need to do a sort of data load balancing, workload load balancing, that kind of thing. So you're right, there's a lot of rethinking for organizations. You're right about how that also gives the user some early quick wins that helps to rationalize the project. And then, of course, we're seeing real-time at TDWI is a strong driver for adding new technologies into the environment. I tell you what, let's go to Chad on this one. Chad, can you just focus briefly on one best practice you want to tap?
Yeah, if I was going to focus on one best practice, describe it from the perspective of, some worst practices that we're seeing. And we've seen both the worst and the best in this regard. But, sometimes when we're engaged with clients or prospects and they define their whole data strategy or big data strategy in terms of technology, it tends to not do as well as clients that really start with what are the business-oriented goals, what are they looking to achieve, the culture that they're trying to create. I mean, things like cost reduction and things are absolutely perfectly fine ways of expressing your strategy, as well as, what are the types of capabilities that you don't currently have that you're looking to provide, right? Do you want to, get more analytics in the hands of more people, more frontline workers? Do you want to create new data-driven products, things like that? Once you get that down and socialized and aligned, then the technology begins to fall in place. But if you start with the technology in the front end, again, we tend to see companies be a bit more disappointed in terms of the results achieved in that regard.
Yeah, I think your general recommendation is a very good one. It's easy to get seduced by technology, especially with really exciting new technologies and the best practices that go with them. But really, there has to be a business strategy, like you pointed out, Chad. And, in a lot of ways, we are in the service industry, right? Do you want fries with that? So, in IT, especially in data management, we should try to figure out what the business needs and then supply the technology and information for them. Now, that assumes the business knows, so sometimes that's beyond our control. But, yeah, you're right. When possible, figure out the business goal and provide the technology, data, analytics, et cetera, to support that. Let's see, TJ, I don't think we've heard from you on this one yet. Is there? No, we did start with you, didn't I?
Not yet. I just have a quick recap.
Yeah, go ahead.
Everybody kind of covered. Yeah, everybody covered pretty much everything real time, linking to business use cases. I think one thing that I would say is the best practice is truly understanding how your users are interacting with your data warehouse. So analyzing SQL queries, seeing how they're actually leveraging the data within the data warehouse, which tables are they frequently accessing and analyzing. Having that visibility into how your users are actually interacting with the data warehouse, because just like Philip mentioned, they are your customers, they are the reason why this technology exists, really helps as you move along this journey of modernizing your data warehouse and understanding which workloads I need to offload to another system that might be more appropriate for it, and which workloads need to stay put because my users are fine and happy with the way it's currently set up. So that's the only addition I'd make, or only additional comment I'd make. And going down to the question of what products and solutions that we offer, we actually recently acquired a company called Explain that does just that, analyze SQL queries and SQL workloads to understand how users are actually interacting with data warehouses. So I'd recommend starting there and then moving along the journey.
Yeah, very good. And frankly, I wish more people monitored their data warehouse environment to find out what kind of queries are users running, which of the queries perform well, which don't. Also, just who are these users, using our warehouse? Are they the people that we thought they were? Are they somebody else? And then things like what data in the warehouse is being accessed and what isn't. Answers to that question can help you understand which data to retire and archive out of the warehouse, get it to some other less expensive platform. So those are great tips. Thank you for sharing those. So let's move on to the third group here. I'd like to start with Vineet this time. And panelists, this time be even more succinct with your answers. I mean, when you look into your crystal ball and you see a variety of trends moving forward, bringing us into the future, what's the top trend in your mind? What do you think is top of mind for most users, but maybe even at your company, what's top of mind? Vineet, go ahead.
Sure, Philip. So I'll bring in the technology aspect here, and really quickly, the top three for us is what do we expect and see in coming years? I think full SQL on Hadoop at all the data, single source of truth at scale. Truly full SQL on Hadoop, that's pretty much what's going to happen. Ability to handle all workloads, interactive batch, OLTP. There's a variety of pooling that's available, variety of technologies that enable that to happen, but that's not really in a very synergized experience. So we are expecting the distro vendors to really solve that problem and have Hadoop really handle all kind of workloads truly. Full warehouse capabilities on Hadoop. There's a lot of pioneers, that are there in the enterprises, the IT groups who are already started pushing the limits. So Hadoop is going beyond those high technology companies, the Google and the Facebook of the world, and really making the transition into the enterprise world. And the IT team and technology teams are really pushing it, to create full warehouse on Hadoop. So that's the top three modernization innovation that I expect to see. In terms of, how should users prepare?
Listen, Vineet, I'll just interrupt at this moment.
All right.
Thank you for starting with SQL on Hadoop. We see that as a priority. For example, in a recent survey, over 80% of survey respondents said that ANSY's standard SQL on Hadoop is a must-have for them to fully grow into BI and data warehousing on Hadoop. So yeah, I think that's a big one. And luckily, all kinds of people are working that out, so that is becoming a reality. I tell you what, number two, let's go to Chad. Chad at Teradata. Chad, when you see these trends leading us into the future, what's the bright spot you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, and in fact, I'll touch on SQL on Hadoop as well, right? Because when I look at sort of particularly the newer technologies that are augmenting the data warehouse, right, I think, as an industry, we're seeing people get comfortable now with the ingest, the store, but there's still very much a primitive access associated with it. And SQL on Hadoop, while it's been around for a few years, still very much in a primitive state, right? And we as, data warehouse practitioners sort of, have an appreciation for how complicated SQL can be, and the optimizer and the grammar and the standards and just the ability to handle tens of thousands of use cases associated with it. But I absolutely see that continuing to mature such that SQL will be the standard for the ecosystem, right? Not just relational, but Hadoop and others. And then a close cousin to that would be continued advances, again, in the types of analytics, advanced analytics that you don't want to be writing long SQL statements or long Java programs. Just want to be able to call different functions and execute those. And then the other thing, too, that I definitely see as a trend is, again, if you look at some of the newer technology being introduced to the stack right now, it's certainly adding value, but what most companies are doing is custom development or bringing in external consultants for that. I think what we'll start to see is a lot more packaged products, right? So already referenced with things like real-time and things like Lambda architecture. I think what the market's demanding is the ability to come in and have something that's pre-configured, tested, where the development costs have been spread out across multiple clients, and it's much quicker to deploy. Real-time's one example, but just ingestion frameworks and things like that will be other pieces to that puzzle.
Very good. Thank you, Chad. And let's go to TJ Layer next from Cloudera. When you look into your crystal ball for the future, what stands out for you?
Definitely. So I definitely agree with all the points that were just made. The thing that really stands out to me is we're headed in a direction where data warehouses are becoming more flexible and Hadoop is becoming more structured. And as these two adoptions and progressions are being made both in the data warehouse and the Hadoop space, these solutions are being blended together more cohesively, right? So people are understanding the value prop of both solutions. They understand how they need both side by side in order to achieve the business outcome that they want. So that's kind of what we see, and kind of an additional layer on top of that is being able to bring these systems, these data warehouse and big data systems, to wherever you want. So if that is the cloud, because that's where your data resides, you need to have the flexibility and the ability to bring those systems to where the data resides, and that's something else that we see. So cloud, on-prem, wherever the data lives, being able to deploy the systems on those platforms.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, TJ. And then Steve Woolidge, why don't you finish up the questions so we can then move into Q&A. Before we hear from Steve, those of you attending, let me remind you to look for that field in your On24 web application, the field that says Ask a Question. So if you have a question for us, please type it now so it'll be queued up for us to get to here in a few minutes. So Steve, take us out here. Among some of the trends leading into the future, what's a bright spot for you?
Yeah, I think that the data warehouse is very mature, as Chad said, in terms of SQL on relational data and the optimizations, the concurrency, all those things there. And in some ways, Hadoop is looked at as, oh, we're just going to offload workloads and data and save costs, but that really doesn't add a lot of additional value to the business. So what I see is the types of data that are more prevalent now. It's not the scale, it's the variety and how fast changing the structures of these data types. Like JSON is a perfect example, from set-top boxes, sensor devices, clickstream, et cetera. And the challenge is more, how do you define schema fast enough to keep up with these new data types and as things change? So what I'm seeing is more things around schemaless data exploration. One of the projects we've invested a lot in the community is Apache Drill. So it's not trying to reinvent the wheel in terms of data warehouse on Hadoop. It's more about how can you ingest data, analyze it in its native format without having to do any predefined schema in advance. So that's some of the innovative things that I'm seeing. And if people want to get started, we've got free online training. You can download Drill for free on our website. But I think those are the new types of things that people want to do rather than just shifting costs around. They want to try and innovate with big data.
Yeah, that's good. And I think one of the recurring themes with the four panelists looking into their crystal balls, the four themes tend to come back to query, don't they? Those of us who have long-standing experience in data warehousing BI, we tend to address data through query, and we've been doing it through SQL forever. And so we need SQL on Hadoop. We still need SQL off of Hadoop too, so I don't want to dismiss one side of that argument. I think we need both of them. And then like Steve was just describing with Drill, we have more of an ANSI standard approach. TJ Layer works for Cloudera with Impala. They're beefing up query capabilities as well. And Hadoop is a great environment, but it's kind of inherently built for batch processing. As it evolves for more iterative work, executing in real time, this query question is going to be a more pressing issue as we try to leverage Hadoop in warehousing environments. So good point to all of you. And that brings us to the end of kind of our questions from me. It's time for questions from the audience. So folks, if you haven't already, find that field in your web browser that says ask a question and type a question in. We've got some good ones up here. You know, I found a nice one to start with. Let's start with a question that asks us about something I don't think we've mentioned so far. And we have an attendee who says, I think data virtualization and data federation should also be part of the data warehouse modernization. What do you think? Well, I think you're right. I think the attendee is right. And I'd kind of like to start with TJ on this one, because I know Cloudera is working on the concept of the enterprise data hub, and I think there's some virtualization or federation built into that. Am I right, or is there something else you want to add?
Yeah, so it depends on the use case and what the actual organization is trying to achieve in their current investments in virtualization technology. But the Enterprise Data Hub that Philip is referencing is what we like to call the new platform that is kind of emerging out of Hadoop, right? So Hadoop alone has a wide variety of components to store, process, discover, model, and serve information. And then the Enterprise Data Hub has security, governance, and management capabilities wrapped around that are not native to the Hadoop ecosystem. And so having a federation layer on top of that, or working with the large partner ecosystem that we have in place already to federize your data and to virtualize the enterprise data warehouse is definitely something that we're able to do. But one really smart guy, Cloudera, once said, Hadoop is about making multiple machines look like one, right, so that you can store and process a bunch of data. Virtualization is almost the flip side of that, of making one machine look like multiple machines. So hopefully that kind of helps you understand whether it's appropriate or not for your particular architecture or use case. But that's kind of where it stands right now, depending on the organization, depending on your current investments and the use case that you're trying to tackle. Virtualization can definitely come into play.
Yeah, good answer. Let me open this to other panelists. Somebody else, go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, so this is Chad. So I absolutely agree with both TJ and the person asking the question. This is an absolutely critical component of, again, the ecosystem, right? So if you have MPP relational, Hadoop, and things outside the Hadoop ecosystem, you know, like a Cassandra or a MongoDB, if the idea is, you know, you're going to persist data in different areas where that makes sense, where that's the appropriate engine for the analytic, then you have to have some constructs to be able to abstract that access and leverage them. And so Teradata actually released some product over a year ago called Query Grid. In fact, we partner with Cloudera and MapR to work on their technology. So you can execute a query from Teradata. It might do some processing in Teradata, then push down processing into a MapR or a Cloudera if that's where the data resides or if that's where the type of processing is most efficient, and then return a single answer. And that's actually gotten significant traction in the marketplace because it really aligns to what most companies are looking to do with their vision of an ecosystem.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, you know, a lot of our comments today have been about Hadoop because, I mean, let's be honest, that's where a lot of the action is today. But also, if we go back to the question asked here, it was about the role of virtualization with data warehouse modernization. You know, there's a thing called the logical data warehouse, and the logical data warehouse is more about beefing up semantic layers, view technologies that are in an architectural layer up, so I think of it as conceptually up above the data storage area and data modeling areas that we sort of obsess about. And so so for a lot of people, data warehouse modernization is to build out the logical layers up there. So yeah, virtualization, it's an important issue with Hadoop, but actually with any platform you have in data warehousing, it's important. And then sort of like Chad was talking about, and also don't forget, Chad is Vice President of the Unified Data Architecture. You know, as a lot of organizations expand the portfolio of platforms in their warehouse environments, having virtual layers that helps them you know, very flexibly build interfaces and view technology become more and more important. And then also something that Steve Woolidge mentioned earlier, which is a lot of this new data is actually schema-free. So you need technology that can sort of deduce and build up schema, even metadata as you work. So I think all that comes together for a lot of organizations with their warehouses. Hey, we got some other questions here. We have a number of questions about real-time. Give me a second. find the one I was looking at a moment ago. Vineet, I'd actually like for you to comment on this one because, Vineet, you were talking earlier about real-time technologies and their growth in the warehouse environment. You've touched on, say, operational data warehousing, which tends to use a lot of real-time fresh data. Give me a second, and I will find this. I will find this question any moment now. So if I can paraphrase the question, it was something like, how do you bring real-time data into a warehouse environment? What kind of interfaces are preferred? And also, how do you keep real-time data from affecting overall performance of the warehouse?
That's a great question, actually. And, you know, a little bit of that answer would depend on the context of what you're building. But generally, the way, you know, we pattern this up is that, you know, if we'll have to, you know, one of the patterns is that you can do a parallel feed at the source. So if you have a stream of data coming in and, you know, it's feeding into the operational data stores, you can do a parallel feed and, you know, have a parallel routing into your real-time platform. So that should not affect the performance of the operational frontline systems and should, you know, also give the ability to do some real-time analytical, you know, processing as well. Now, there could be active and passive ways of, you know, parallelizing that, and we've implemented both types of use cases. You know, I could go into a lot of details around that. But there are cases where, you know, while you're processing, say, you know, credit card transactions, you're determining fraud, you need to reach out and do some kind of, you know, customer history or some kind of rules or something that are read about the customer from an operational data system. You tend to use a lot of, you know, caching for these things. You know, inherently real-time operations are very short window, you know, things. You do not need to keep the whole lot of you know, data in the memory and available all the times. So caching frequently used data or rules, you know, ahead of time is another pattern that that could be used and reduce the performance impact on the ODS.
Very good. Thank you, Vineet. Hey, listen, folks, we also have some questions sort of questioning Hadoop and big data. For example, one attendee asks, well, you guys are giving a lot of examples about big data in big companies. Does Hadoop, do big data have roles to play in more of a sort of a mid-size or smaller company? Steve Woolidge, I haven't heard from you yet. What do you think of this? I can think of a couple examples where Hadoop doesn't necessarily deal with big data and where it may be useful. What do you think? Do you see Hadoop going kind of down market, as they say?
Yeah, I mean, we see customers across the Global 1000 or Global 2000, but also a lot of younger companies that don't have any existing systems, and Hadoop and the ecosystem tends to be a place where they start because there is so much there in open source that they can get started with. So absolutely, it's a starting point for a lot of companies regardless of scale or size. I mean, sometimes just the analytic processing that needs to happen, regardless of how big your company is, could be really heavy. A lot of data-driven companies are you know, just have a lot of data that they need to process. So it's everywhere, really.
Yeah, that's a good one. We have a... Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, just real quick, the new emerging kind of technology companies that are using data as the centerpiece of their applications are a lot of times turning to the Hadoop ecosystem and community in order to deploy that technology to build these new innovative applications that have data at the center of it, right? So if your job is to supply energy analytics out to consumers, right, building that platform on top of Hadoop, which is one of our customers, O-Power. So when data is the centerpiece of your strategy or your application that you're developing, a lot of times these smaller organizations are turning to Hadoop to develop these applications.
All right, very good. Great answers, guys, but we're just about out of time here, so let me conclude. I want to remind everyone in the audience that a lot of the material we're talking about today is actually documented in a new report from TDWI called 8 Tips for Modernizing a Data Warehouse. So if you look on your screen, you might want to jot down the URL, bit.ly 8DWMods there, or whatever it is. You might want to jot that down and get your own free copy of this report. It makes a good follow-up reading from today's panel. Speaking of today's panel, I want to thank TJ Layer from Cloudera, Vineet Tyagi from Impetus, Steve Woolidge from MapR, and Chad Melee from Teradata. Thank you guys for sponsoring the report as well as participating in today's webinar. And thank you so much for sharing your expertise. It's very impressive how much brain power we've got on this today. So I want to thank the panel, but also thank the audience. Those of you who found time to join us today, I know you're busy. We really appreciate you joining us. And so don't forget, if you registered for the webinar and you gave us a accurate email address, you will get an email from us, and it will give you a link so that you can replay the archived recorded version of this webinar. Feel free to share that link with your peers or anybody you want to. So I want to thank everybody. Great webinar, and everybody have a great day. Thank you and goodbye.